Hello everyone and welcome. In this video I'm going to talk about while loops in C++. So let's get into it. So first of all, I'm just going to show you the basic syntax of a while loop, and then I'm going to talk about why you would want to use a while loop in your programs, and then I'm going to talk about some cool stuff that you can do with these while loops. So first of all, I'm going to create a variable. It's going to equal 0 in the beginning, and then the basic syntax for a while loop is you're going to say while, and then parentheses, and then inside of these parentheses, I'm going to put a condition. You'll understand why in just a minute. And then I'm going to write curly braces. Anything that's in between these curly braces is going to be inside of the loop. So these curly braces delimits the beginning and the end of the loop. And inside of the loop, I'm going to say cout num and then end line. And then I'm going to say num plus plus. So let me run this to show you what the output is. So this is going to output the numbers 0 to 4. It's taking while running. Okay. So 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So what is happening here? So num is going to start at 0. And then in this loop, basically what I'm saying is while num is smaller than 5, so while this condition is true, I want to keep iterating. I want to keep looping. And in each iteration, each time this loop runs, I want to see out the current value of num and then end line, and then I want to increment num. So first num is equal to 0, then it's going to see out num, it's going to increment it to 1, it's going to see out 1, it's going to increment num to 2, it's going to see out 2, it's going to increment it to 3, and then it's going to increment it to 4, and then it's going to increment it to 5. When it increments num to 5, then this condition is no longer met, and so this loop just stops running, and so this is going to see out the numbers 0 to 4. Okay, so that's the basics of how a while loop works. Now, this is a very simplistic example. You wouldn't really want to do this with a while loop. It would be much easier to use a for loop to do this because you know how many times you want to iterate, right? You have a set number of times that you want to iterate. You know how many times you're going to loop, and so it would be easier to use a for loop because you just define an iterator, you increment or decrement that iterator, and then when that iterator hits a certain value, then the loop is going to stop, right? Now, why would you want to use a while loop? So a while loop is used when you don't know how many times you want to iterate, okay? So this is why this is not a great example of why you would want to use a while loop, because in this case, you know how many times you're going to iterate, right? You're going to iterate 5 times. So let me show you another example where you don't know how many times you're going to iterate. Let me just put the ending curly brace. Okay, so I'm going to create a variable which is called num. But this time I'm not going to initialize it. I'm not going to initialize it, meaning I'm not going to give it a value. Now I'm going to say while num is different from 4, for example, I'm going to cout type the number 4, and then I'm going to cin num like this, and yeah. So now what's going to happen is I'm going to cout type the number 4, and I'm going to ask the user to cin a value for num. And then while num is different from 4, I'm going to keep iterating. So while the user doesn't input the number 4 specifically, I'm going to keep asking the user to input numbers, right? So this is a perfect example of why you would want to use a while loop, right? Because in this case, you don't know how many times you're going to iterate. You don't know how many tries it's going to take for the user to input the number 4, right? So let me run this. This is going to ask me to type the number 4. If I type 1, it's going to ask me again. If I type 5, it's going to ask me again. If I type 4, it's going to finish, right? If I run this again, for example, let me type 4, it's going to finish, right? So in both of these tries, it took a different amount of times for me to input the number 4. And so the loop iterated a different amount of time, right? So that is why you would want to use a while loop. You don't know when this condition is no longer going to be met. And so you can't use a for loop, because if you want to use a for loop, then you have to have a set number of times that you want to iterate. In this case, you don't. So you use a while loop. So now I'm going to show you something called a do while loop. So let me delete all of this, and I'm going to ask the user to see in num from outside of the loop, and then I'm going to say while num is greater than 0, I want to decrement num, so num minus minus, and then I want to see out the value of num, and then I want to see out an end line. All right, so let me run this. If I type the number 3, for example, this is going to output the numbers 2 to 0. So basically what's happening is I've asked the user to input a number, and then while that number is greater than 0, I'm going to decrement that number, and I'm going to see out the result. All right. Now let me run this again, and let me show you what happens when I type a negative number. So for example, if I type -1 and I run this is not even going to produce any output. So why does this happen? Well, that's because this condition that's going to allow us to enter the the while loop is not even going to be met in the first place, right? Because num is already going to be a negative number. It's already not going to be greater than 0. And so this condition is not going to be met in the beginning. And so we're not even going to enter this loop, all right? Now, let's imagine that I want this to run at least once independently on the value of num. All right, so how can I ensure that that happens? Well, I can do that using a do while loop. So let me copy this, and I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to write do and then curly braces, and then I'm going to paste this right here. And then in the end, I'm going to say while num is greater than 0 and then semicolon. All right, so let me run this, and let me type -1 like this. This is going to output -2, and it's going to stop. So what is happening here? So first of all, I'm going to see in num. I'm going to ask the user to input a value for num, and then independently on that value, I'm going to decrement num, and I'm going to see out the ending result. And then in the end, I'm going to check if num is greater than 0, and if it is, then I'm going to do this again. And then I'm going to check again. If this is still true, I'm going to do this again. If this stops being true, then I'm going to stop. All right. So this is going to ensure that this happens at least once independently on the value of num, right? Because first we do, and then we check, right? In a normal while loop, you're going to check first, and then you're going to do. And so the checking part is not even going to allow you to enter the loop, because you're going to check, you're going to see that this condition is not true, you're not gonna enter the loop. In a do while loop, you're going to do first, so you're going to decrement num and you're going to see out num, and then afterwards you're going to check. All right, so this is going to ensure that this is going to run at least once independently on the value of num, which is exactly what we wanted. So I think that's all I had to show you today. In this video, you learned about while loops, you learned about do while loops. Now keep in mind that while loops are normal loops, so you can put anything you want inside of a while loop. You can define variables, you can put conditionals, you can put other loops, you can use the break and the continue keywords in while loops as well, and all of that stuff. So I hope this was easy to understand. As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.